I'm with Mark Christie, Chief Technology Officer at Piksel, and Clive Malcher, SVP Commercial Development at Piksel. Hello, gentlemen.
Hi, John.
We're beginning to hear a lot about microservices, and obviously we're all getting used to the term cloud and what it is, but can you tell us exactly what microservices is, Mark?
Sure. Well, I think microservices are essentially it's an architecture pattern of building software that can take advantage of public clouds, private clouds, but in a way that allows you to kind of decompose your traditional monolithic application into a set of services, and each one of those services can be used independently, and each one of those services can scale on demand. So when you need to deal with more load, you can scale your infrastructure, but only the services that need to take that load, and that gives you a really good alignment with the cost of the service and the operating costs of serving a large, diverse audience, say for an OTT service, but you only really need to scale the components when the usage increases.
Okay, and compared to the cloud that most people are talking about, which is just virtualization, or some people are calling it lift and shift, I mean, what is the difference?
So I think lift and shift is really virtualization. So, you're taking a whole set of applications that have been written in a conventional way, and all you're doing is virtualizing those onto the cloud. So that doesn't really give you the advantages of what public clouds can provide with this kind of scaling and elasticity of the cloud, because you've got the same kind of constraints you have of running, say, an Oracle cluster database on-premise. You can virtualize that, but if you want to scale that, then you've still got all the complexities of using clustering and scaling that Oracle database, as opposed to being able to scale on demand by using public cloud's ability to spin up new compute nodes, and put those into say a server farm, and scale through configuration and automation, as opposed to still get the engineering team out, log onto the box, add another node. So the way that microservices can be deployed can be completely automated, and that really helps us be efficient in terms of how we manage that infrastructure.
Okay, and at its heart, is it about re-architecting software so it's just in smaller components? Is that the heart of it?
Absolutely. So it is just about making sure that there's a good separation of concerns against the service that you're providing, and making that as a small component, not too small, because then you start losing efficiencies and you start making your infrastructure more complicated. So you need a balance of where you actually split these services or these components into chunks, which are essentially those services that can then scale independently.
Okay, and Clive, I mean, Mark talks about scaling on demand. I mean, what are the other key benefits for microservices?
Well, I think we talked a bit about the cost base there in terms of your cost following your usage, but I think probably one of the main drivers for microservices is the flexibility and the agility that it gives you. So as a business, in terms of moving forward in a very competitive environment, microservices is the architecture that allows you to meet the market challenges. And so by this separation of concerns that we talked about, by breaking down features into services, allows you to work on individual services at a time. So you can have separate teams working on individual services. You can then deploy those services separately, rather than having to deploy the entire monolith, which means that you can get changes out very quickly. So for a business that wants to adapt very quickly to market conditions, it can rapidly iterate features on a service by service basis, and really that then allows them to use microservices to respond in the marketplace more quickly. So I think that's probably one of the key drivers for businesses.
Yeah. I mean, we hear about agility a lot, even when just talking about the cloud without microservices mentioned. So what's the difference? Is it just more agile?
Well, the difference really is that because you can release on a service by service basis, you can do so at much lower risk. You're making very, very small increments. Those increments are very known, and so you can release. And it's that rather than typically monoliths, you may get a release every month, a release every quarter, making lots and lots of changes, a very high requirement, very high QA requirement, very risky change. you can do multiple changes per day to production in a very automated way with microservices. You know what you're changing, it's very small increments, and so therefore your risks are much lower. So I think that's the sort of really the key benefit there in terms of that drives that agility.
Okay, and that idea of scaling against resources closer to your needs, just explain that in a bit more detail. I mean, what does that mean in practice? Okay, so if we imagine a live sporting event, for instance, a boxing match or a Formula One race, some of the requirements of the system will vary through that. Typically at the very beginning, you'll have a peak of users coming in who'll need to authenticate or need to check entitlements, and say Formula One, they want to get there to watch the start of the grid, they want to see the race start of the grid, so there's a very peaky traffic there. Using microservices, we can scale the individual services that are required for those tasks, so that the authentication, the entitlement checks, once we're over that peak, then we can scale them back down again. We don't have to scale the entire monolith, so there's no point in scaling systems that aren't required, which would just be wasteful. We only scale the systems that are required. If we have a sudden requirement to transcode a back catalogue that needs to be delivered very quickly, we can scale encoders up to do the transcoding, scale them back down again. Rather than having to always have those encoders there all the time. So it's meeting the individual requirements placed on the system on a service by service basis at any one time. Okay, Mark, you're one of the very few vendors who have already re-architected your software for microservices, and that's based on your Piksel palette microservices platform. Yeah. Is that an easy thing to do?
I think it's incredibly difficult for platform providers to make it incredibly easy for our customers to use microservices. And what I mean by that is, you said we re-architected our platform. Well, actually, we built our platform from scratch, because it's not just the technology and the design pattern approach and the architecture of microservices. It's a whole philosophy about how you develop software for cloud-native platforms. So we started a new product organization. We started that product organization off with a DevOps culture. So we are not fear of change. We deploy without fear. We do everything through automation. So once we deploy a system, we can tear that system down every night. Indeed, we take our development platform down every night and rebuild it in the morning to show that we're eating our own dog food of using our services, because we have a lot of experience of how we used to run managed services, and that was very resource intensive. And what we wanted to do was take all that learning and build the best platform we could. And that really leads on automation. So if something breaks, the development team within the DevOps context actually fix it. So they make sure they're fixing things and developing things the right way, so they're not getting out of bed in the middle of the night to fix it. 100% automation of testing, and as Clive said, we release to production 10, 15 times a day. All very small incremental changes that we can monitor and we can reverse if needed, but it's completely different to how traditional software releases work. And it is incredibly difficult to get that into an organization, just the whole mentality and change to make these services that are easy for our customers to use. You can't do it overnight, and it does take a change of culture. That's why we built that culture and that DevOps operation for our product engineering team from scratch.
Okay, and Clive, we're hearing about even pioneers like Discovery Communications. Some of their applications are going microservices straight into the cloud, and then in some instances they had to do it quite quickly because they were shutting data centers, and they've done a lift and shift, and then some of it will be sort of re-architected later. There doesn't seem to be a sort of a straight path to where people are going. I mean, what's the likely sort of roadmap for the industry in general?
So I think people are going to be looking at their architecture. They're going to be looking at where they need to innovate quickly, and those are probably candidates for microservices. They're going to be looking at their existing systems, the ones that are giving them pain. And again, those are ones where if they're looking at re-architecting those, then microservices are candidates as well. But equally, there'll be parts of their system which probably give them little commercial benefit in terms of how they differentiate themselves. They may be systems that actually are perhaps relatively inexpensive operationally, and they may choose to leave those. So I think it's about focusing. Equally, they may bolt microservices around them until they can completely subsume the functionality of a monolith, a legacy monolith. So I think there's a number of different steps, and people have to be pragmatic. It's a technology decision, it's a business decision, but as Mark said, it's also an organisational change decision. So how quickly can you organise yourself to make use of microservices in the particular areas where you need to focus on. It isn't just about technology, it's about organisation, it's about decentralised teams, it's about sort of looking at business capability rather than necessarily technology, and I think that's the challenge that will often define perhaps the roadmap as much as anything.
Okay, and Mark, is it inevitable that we will go as an industry right the way through, not just cloud but microservices cloud?
I think so, because I think it's, you tend to get into this traditional kind of buying pattern where it's, okay, we've got this platform, or we've got this system, we need a new media asset management system, so we're going to spend a lot of time kind of transitioning, building out a program of work and transitioning away from one media asset management system to another. I think in the future, because of the smaller kind of offerings of these microservices, we believe it's going to be an ecosystem. So when I'm looking at changing my media asset management system, I'm not just changing one product out for another. I might be deploying a whole set of new services, microservices. I'll be using multiple vendors and there'll be a way of communicating between these kind of vendor clouds, and I'm going to orchestrate what I want in terms of my workflows and my supply chains that work for my business. And if I've got a particular pain point, I can swap out that service with another one. So I think in some ways vendors have got to, one, get onto the microservices side, and then this approach of a kind of an ecosystem registry of services that allow the customers to build and orchestrate their workflows, new workflows, and allow them to the agility that Clive was talking about, building new services and new offerings extremely quickly through configuration.
Okay, all right, well, it's clearly one of the things we need to watch as an industry, so thanks for explaining it to us. Great talking to you both.
Thank you.